The Duke of Thornfield did not flinch when Linnet Marsh set the edge of the razor to his throat, though every barber between the house and the coast road had already refused to touch his face at all. She would remember, long afterward, that his eyes stayed open the whole while, fixed on hers in the shaving glass, as though he had decided before she ever lifted the blade that whatever she found in that ruined jaw, she would not be the one to look away first. She did not yet know that this was the whole of the test. She would not know, for weeks yet, that it was the only test in the house that mattered, and that she had already begun to pass it. 6 weeks earlier, she had come to Thornfield Hall with a dead father's razor wrapped in flannel at the bottom of her one trunk and no plan beyond a roof and a wage, and she had found the housekeeper, a broad, brisk woman named Hale, sitting on the back step with her apron over her face, done in. 3 barbers had come up from the village in a fortnight and gone again faster than they came. The first had taken one look at the scar that ran from temple to jaw and made an excuse about a sick mother. The second had lasted the length of one lather before his hand shook so badly the Duke sent him off with his wages and his dignity both intact, which the house agreed was more mercy than the man deserved. The third had demanded double pay for the privilege of standing that near to what the village called, in the safety of the tavern, the butcher of Thornfield, and had been shown the door before he finished asking. "McElmus is 6 weeks off," Hale had said, wringing a corner of her apron as though it were a difficult letter she could not finish reading, "and the settlement guests will want a duke who does not look as though he has walked out of a story meant to frighten children, and I have not one barber left in the county fool enough to try." "I can shave a man clean," Lynette said. "I was raised to it." "He was raised to it by whom?" Hale asked. "My father," Lynette said. "He kept a barber surgeon's shop for 11 years before he lost it." She did not say how, and Hale, to her credit, did not ask that first day, only led her up the back stair to the room where the Duke of Thornfield sat each morning in punishing silence, his valet long since resigned, his jaw dark with 3 days' neglect, and a temper in the house that servants spoke of the way sailors speak of weather. He had not looked up when she came in. He had only said, in a voice pitched low enough that she had to lean toward it to catch the words, "You may try, and if your hand shakes I will tell you so before you cut me, so that we may both be spared the apology." She had crossed the room, set out her father's tools on the washstand in the order her father had taught her, blade and strop and brush and bowl, and begun to lather without asking permission to look at him properly, which was, though she did not know it then, the first thing about her that he noticed. The scar ran pale and puckered from the crest of his left temple down through the eyebrow, skipping the eye by the width of a coin and finishing along the hinge of the jaw in a knot of old, tight skin that pulled his mouth very slightly out of true when he spoke, so that some words came out of him, faintly crooked, and no one before her had had the nerve to shave close along that ruined seam. She tipped his chin with 2 fingers, the way her father had taught her to tip a stranger's chin, gently and without asking leave, and drew the blade up along the good side first to let him grow used to the sound of it. "Your hand is very steady," he said, when she had gone half the length of his throat without a single word between them. "A steady hand tells no lies, Your Grace," she said. "My father taught me that before he taught me anything else. And what does an unsteady one tell? That the barber is afraid, or that the story he has heard about you is true, and cannot decide which is worse." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, on the good side, that might have been the ancestor of a smile if it had been permitted to finish growing. "And which have you heard?" he asked. "Several," she said, drawing the blade close along the ridge of the scar without slowing, "and I have not found one of them steady enough to trust yet." He did not answer that. He only closed his eyes, which she would come to understand later was the closest thing to surrender the Duke of Thornfield ever allowed himself in that room, and let her finish the working side of his face in silence, while somewhere below the window, a lark that had nested in the eaves for longer than anyone in the house could account for sang on, indifferent to dukes and their scars, and the 6 weeks now counting down toward Michaelmas, when the betrothal papers were to be signed before the whole county, whether the bridegroom's face had been shaved by then or not. She learned the shape of the house the way she had once learned the shape of her father's shop, by its instruments and its habits rather than by its rooms. Mrs. Hale kept her in the servants' hall the first evening and told her, without being asked, most of what a new maid needed to know, and a good deal she had not. "You'll take your orders from me and from Mr. Vane," Hale said, meaning Simeon Vane, the Duke's cousin and the estate's man of business, who signs the wages and minds the accounts since his grace has no patience for ledgers, and you'll keep out from underfoot of the physician's man when he comes with the tonic, for his grace's nerves have never been strong since the accident, and Mr. Vane worries over him like a hen with one chick. Lynette turned the strop twice against her palm, a habit she had inherited along with the razor and had never managed to break, and asked carefully what accident that would be. 10 years gone, Hale said, her voice dropping the way voices drop over graves. His Grace and his brother, Lord Edmund, that was to be Duke before him, went out in the carriage after a supper party, and the axle failed on the turn above the ford, and Lord Edmund did not come home, and his Grace came home with that face, and has not been fully easy since, God keep him. There is a rumor in the village, Hale added, lowering her voice further still, that his Grace was driving too fast, that it was temper did it, not the axle. But I'll not have that spoken in this kitchen. For I knew the boy he was before, and no boy who wept 3 days running over a dead hound would have driven his own brother into a ravine for sport. It was not my place to have an opinion on it, Lynette said later, alone in the little attic room she had been given, testing the truth of that sentence against the ceiling beams, as though they might contradict her. It was not her place. She had come to Thornfield for a wage and a roof, and had found instead a man who closed his eyes to be touched, and a house that flinched at the mention of an axle, the way her own family had once flinched at the mention of a coroner's report, and she told herself, folding her father's razor back into its flannel, that the two griefs had nothing to do with one another, and she almost believed it. Her father, Thomas Marsh, had kept the finest barber surgeon's shop in the market town for 11 years, had set bones and pulled teeth and shaved half the gentlemen of 3 parishes with a hand so steady that mothers brought their children to him for splinters rather than trust a physician's fee, and had died 4 winters past, owning nothing but his tools and a reputation that other men had taken care to ruin before they let him die of the cold that finished the job. What he had done to earn that ruin, she did not yet tell Mrs. Hale, though the older woman watched her sideways over the mending that first week, the way one watches a kettle one suspects of being about to boil. He had told the truth about something he had been paid handsomely to keep quiet, Lynette might have said, if asked, and it cost him everything, and I have his razor and his rule about steady hands and very little else, and I mean to keep both as long as I am able. No one asked. She was, by design and by long practice, the sort of woman no one thought to ask. She had been 3 weeks in the house before Simeon Vane troubled himself to notice her, and when he did it gently, which she would learn was always the most dangerous way he did anything. She was crossing the lower hall with an armful of linen when he stepped out of the estate office, as though he had been waiting behind the door for the sound of her footsteps, a slight, exquisitely turned-out man of perhaps 45. his cravat tied with a precision that made her own father's Sunday collar look like a farmer's rag. Smelling faintly of orange flower water even at that hour of the morning. "So you are the girl who has tamed my cousin's face," he said, and smiled in a way that reached no farther up than his mouth. "I would not call it taming, sir," she said. "I would call it shaving." He laughed, a small, pleasant sound, and reached out to straighten a fold of linen she had not asked him to straighten, smoothing his gloved thumb along the crease as though setting a crooked ledger line right. "He is a difficult subject, is he not?" he said. "Grief does strange things to a man's temper, and his Grace's has never fully recovered from what it cost him. I only hope, for your sake, that you understand the difference between a man who wants his face touched and a man who has simply run out of other people willing to touch it." "I understand my trade, sir," she said, and did not step back, though something in the way he said the word cost made the hair rise along her arms. "Of course you do," he said, and his gloved hand found her chin for half a second, tipped it, precisely the way she tipped the Duke's each morning, and released it before she could decide whether she had permission to be offended. "I hope you will forgive an old cousin's protectiveness. He has so little left that has not already been spent on his behalf, and I should hate to see anyone spend more of it without his leave." He went, smoothing his cuffs, and left her standing in the hall with the linen forgotten in her arms and the ghost of his orange flower scent hanging in the air like a warning written in a hand too fine to read easily. Below stairs, the household had begun, in the way of households, to make a story of her. "She is a barber's daughter, come down in the world," said the between maid, Suki, to anyone who would listen, "and she has got round his Grace faster than any doctor in 10 years, and cook wagers a shilling she will be turned out by my Kelmas for her impertinence, though what impertinence cook meant, no one troubled to specify." Linnet let the talk run past her the way she let most talk run past her, filed away instead, in the private ledger she kept behind her own ribs, the small, true things that mattered more than gossip. That the Duke's hand trembled faintly on the days a certain green bottle arrived from Mr. Peel, the apothecary, and steadied again by evening. That the bottle's label, when she once glimpsed it left uncorked on the washstand, was written in a careful, copying hand that did not match the loose, urgent scrawl she had once seen on an order slip in Mr. Vane's own writing, left open on the estate office desk the day she passed with the linen. That the tonic smelled, beneath its bitter medicinal sweetness, faintly of poppy, in a strength her father would have called dangerous in a man already prone to melancholy. She said nothing of any of it. Not yet. Only marked it the way her father had taught her to mark a wound before deciding how to dress it, and went on stropping the razor twice before she spoke, and spoke less than she noticed, which was, in that house, already becoming its own kind of danger. The shaving became, by the 4th week, less a chore endured and more an hour kept, though neither of them called it that aloud. He began to be dressed and seated before she arrived, rather than after, his shirt already loosened at the collar, and she began to bring the bowl in warmer than the kitchen required, because she had noticed, without remarking on it, that heat eased the old scar tissue and let the blade travel more kindly across it. "You need not warm it especially for me," he said one morning, watching her in the glass. "I did not warm it especially," she said, which was a lie so small and so smoothly delivered that he laughed outright, a short, startled sound, as though the laugh had escaped before he could stop it at the door. It was the first time she had heard it, and she marked that too, the way she marked the tonic and the handwriting, filed under things that mattered more than they ought. "That is the first time you have laughed since I came into this room," she said, drawing the blade along his jaw. "Is it?" he said, and something in his voice went careful. "I had not noticed I did it so rarely." "You do not," she said. You smile with the corner that still moves, and you nod, and once you very nearly wept over an account of a drowned dog in the newspaper. But I have not heard you laugh until this moment. He was quiet long enough that she thought she had trespassed too far, and began instead to tell him, unasked, about her father's shop, the customers who came in Sunday, drunk and left sober and shaved, the boy who had once tried to pay in stolen eggs, small true things offered as a kind of apology for having looked too closely. He listened the way some men listen to rain, without needing it to stop. There is a thing about my brother, he said when she had gone quiet again, that I have never told anyone in this house, and I find I cannot yet tell you either, though I have begun 3 times this month to try. She did not press him. She only said, my father used to say a wound wants light, not a bandage tied too soon, and let the razor finish its stroke in silence, and felt him go very still beneath her hand, the stillness of a man deciding whether a stranger might, after all, be trusted with a thing he had not trusted to his own blood. He did not finish deciding that morning. A knock came at the door before either of them could break the silence further. Mr. Vane's voice pleasant and unhurried in the corridor, asking after his Grace's tonic. And the Duke's eyes opened at once, the shutters coming down behind them so fast she nearly cut him. Later, she said, so quietly she was not certain he heard it. He heard it. He caught her wrist, just once, just briefly, his thumb finding the pulse there the way a physician finds a pulse, and said, I will hold you to that, Miss Marsh, and let her go before Vane's hand had finished turning the latch. The blow, when it came dressed as concern, which was how Simeon Vane dressed every blow he ever struck. He came to the shaving room himself one gray morning in September, uninvited, and stood by the window with his gloved hands folded while Lynette worked, watching her in the glass the way a man watches a hand of cards he already knows he holds. I have had a curious letter from the market town, he said, to no one in particular. It seems Thomas Marsh's daughter has found employment in this house, and the writer, an old creditor of your father's, was good enough to remind me why the man lost his shop. He did not lose it fairly, Lynette said, before she could decide whether saying so was wise. Fairly is a large word, Vane said, smiling his mouth only smile. He accused a respected family of tampering with a carriage axle on no evidence but his own eye, and when the coroner's jury found otherwise, he would not withdraw it, even at the cost of his license and his custom, and, eventually, his life. Grief does strange things to a man's reason, does it not, Your Grace, he added, turning the words toward the Duke with a gentleness that was itself a kind of blade. I only wonder whether the daughter has inherited the father's habit of seeing conspiracies in ordinary accidents. The razor did not so much as pause in Lynette's hand, though her heart had begun to strike very hard against her ribs. My father saw a clean sawn axle where the coroner reported a break, she said. He never once accused a family by name in my hearing. He accused mine, Vane said softly, and let the silence after it do the rest of his work. The Duke's eyes had opened. He was watching her in the glass now, not his cousin. His face, unreadable in the particular way she had learned, meant he was working very hard to keep it so. Is that true? He asked her, and his voice had gone quiet in the way that frightened people more than shouting ever could. I do not know what my father found, she said, and it was the truth, and it cost her something to say it plainly rather than defend a dead man she could not fully vouch for. I know only that he would not recant a thing he believed true, even when recanting would have fed us. I know that a steady hand tells no lies, and that mine has not shaken once since I came into this room, and that is the whole of what I have to offer as proof, and I am aware it is not enough for a court. It was, for a moment, nearly enough for the room. Then Vane smoothed his cuffs. Once, the small, immaculate gesture she had begun to recognize the way one recognizes a particular cough before an illness declares itself, and said, "I only raise it, cousin, because my Kelmes draws close, and Mr. Fenwick's family will want assurance that this house harbors no one inclined to manufacture scandal where none exists." He left before anyone could answer him, and the Duke sat very still under her unfinished blade, the good side of his jaw gone tight, and said nothing at all until she had wiped the last of the lather away, and then he said only, "You may go," in a voice she did not recognize, and she went, and did not trust herself to speak again until she was 3 flights down and alone. She was given notice 4 days later, not by the Duke, who had not spoken to her since, but by Vane himself, standing in the estate office with a small leather purse already counted out on the desk between them. "His Grace's nerves cannot bear uncertainty so close to the settlement," he said, "and I am sure you understand that a house under this much scrutiny cannot keep on a girl whose own family history invites the very rumor we are laboring to avoid. There is a month's wage here, and a character besides, if you go quietly and do not trouble His Grace with a scene." She looked at the purse a long moment, and at him, and found, to her own surprise, that her hands were perfectly steady. "I will go when His Grace tells me to go," she said, "not before, and not for money offered so that I might spare you the trouble of him telling me himself." "That is not wise, Miss Marsh," Vane said, and for the first time something under the pleasantness showed its edge, briefly, the way a blade shows under silk before the silk is drawn back over it. "Wisdom was never much use to my father either, sir," she said, and left the purse untouched on the desk, and walked out with her wages unclaimed and her position unresolved, which cost her, she knew, a good deal more than the coin she had refused. It was not defiance, exactly, that carried her down the corridor with her spine so straight it ached. Defiance would have been easier. Defiance burned itself out by supper. This was quieter and colder, and would, she suspected, still be sitting in her chest a year from now, regardless of how the next month resolved itself. Mrs. Hale found her an hour later scrubbing a hearth that did not need scrubbing, and sat down on the fender beside her without being asked, and said in the flat, unadorned voice she kept for the truths that mattered, "He has not eaten since Tuesday, and he has doubled the tonic on his own order, against the physician's writing, and Mr. Peel delivered it anyway, because Mr. Vane instructed him to. And I do not like the look of this house at all, girl, and I have liked it less every year since the accident. Though I have never said so above a whisper until now." "Doubled it," Lynette said. "On whose order was the dose first set?" "On the physician's," Hale said. "But the physician has not called in a fortnight, and it is Mr. Vane who sends the bottles up with Peel's boy, and I could not tell you, on my life, who is truly deciding the measure anymore." That night, unable to sleep, Lynette unwrapped her father's razor from its flannel for reasons she could not have named even to herself, turned it over in the candlelight the way she had turned it over 100 times before, and noticed, for the first time in 4 years of ownership, that the rosewood case beneath the blade's velvet bed sat very slightly proud of its frame, as though something thin and folded had been pressed beneath the lining long before she was ever given the case to keep. Her fingernail found the seam before her mind had fully agreed to look for one, and the false bottom of the case came away with a small, tired sigh, as though it had been waiting a decade to be asked. Inside lay 2 folded sheets in her father's hand, brittle at the creases, the ink browned but perfectly legible, and she read them twice through by candlelight, with her heart going so hard she could hear it over the rain that had begun, quite suddenly, to beat against the attic window. The axle of the Thornfield carriage, her father had written, in the careful, unhurried hand he had used for coroner's notes, was not broken by strain, as the jury was told, but sawn through 3 parts of its width and left to fail on the strength of the last quarter. A working no honest smith would mistake for an accident, and no coroner examined closely enough to see, being satisfied by the word of the estate's own man of business that the carriage had simply been old. He named no one outright on the page, but he had underlined twice the words Mr. Vane furnished the smith's report himself and had written beneath it in a hand grown suddenly less steady, "I am told to let the matter rest, and offered money to do so, and I find I cannot take it, though God knows we need it, for a boy is dead and another disfigured, and I will not spend the rest of my life shaving men with a lie folded under my own tongue." She sat a long while with the papers in her lap, and the rain finding the window in fitful handfuls, and understood, with the particular cold clarity that comes only very late at night, that the accident which had scarred the Duke of Thornfield and killed his brother had not been an accident at all, that Simeon Vane had known it for 10 years, that her father had died believing a truth no one would credit him for, and that somewhere below her, in a house gone quiet with dread and double doses, the man she had shaved every morning for 6 weeks believed, and had perhaps believed every day since he was 20 years old, that he himself had driven too fast, had killed his own brother through some failure of his own hands, and had spent a decade paying for a crime that had never once been his. She thought of him closing his eyes each morning to let her near the scar. She thought of the words he had begun 3 times and finished none of. "There is a thing about my brother I cannot yet tell you." She dressed before the candle had burned another inch, wrapped the papers back into the flannel with the razor, and went down through a sleeping house toward the estate office, where a lamp still burned behind the curtain though it was gone midnight, because whatever else the night asked of her, she did not intend to spend 1 more hour of it not knowing what she now knew, and pretending, for the sake of her own safety, that a wound so old could go on healing quietly in the dark. The lamp in the estate office was not Vane's, as it turned out, but Mrs. Hale's, who had taken to sitting up of late with a shawl and a rosary she did not use for praying so much as for something to hold, and who startled half out of her chair when Lynette came through the door white-faced with papers in her fist. "Sit down, girl, before you fall down," Hale said, and Lynette sat and told her all of it in the low-level voice she had learned from her father for delivering bad news to frightened families, the axle, the underlined name, the money offered and refused, and Hale's hand had found the rosary and gone very still around it. "I always thought it queer," Hale said at last, "that Mr. Vane wept so little at the funeral for a man who called himself heartbroken every day since." "Grief wears a man thin," Lynette said. "It does not usually leave him fatter in the accounts. There is more," Hale said, after a moment, and something in her voice had changed, gone careful and low, as though she were setting down a tray she had carried a long way without spilling it. "Peel's boy left a satchel in the scullery last week by mistake, thinking it Mr. Vane's own correspondence bag, and I looked through it before I returned it, God forgive me, because I have not trusted that man's tonic bottles in a 12-month, and I found a letter in it, not sent, only drafted, in Mr. Vane's hand, instructing Peel to keep the dose at its present strength until after Michaelmas, whatever the physician's writing says, for a settled man signs papers more readily than an anxious one, and a house in mourning for its master's wits will not look too closely at who holds the pen for him. She had kept it, folded small, in the lining of her own work-basket, not knowing what use it might serve, only that it felt, in her hands, like a thing too dangerous to burn and too dangerous to carry openly, and she brought it out now and laid it beside Thomas Marsh's 10-year-old testimony on the office desk, the old proof and the new lying side by side in the lamplight, like two ends of the same rope, finally drawn taut. "It is not enough that we know it," Lynette said, turning her father's papers over gently, as though they might still bruise. "He must know it. And the county must know it. Before Michaelmas. Before that girl's father signs a settlement that hands Mr. Vane the keys to this house through a marriage neither party wants." "There will be witnesses at the ball," Hale said slowly. "Mr. Prentice the solicitor always attends, being an old friend of the late Duke's, and he is as honest a man as breathes in this county, and would not be bought by Vane's cologne and his cuffs the way half the drawing rooms have been." "And Peel," Lynette said. "Peel wrote the label himself, in a hand I have seen before, and a man who writes a lie for another man's coin can sometimes be made to unwrite it, if he is asked the right question, in front of the right people, before he has time to decide which master frightens him more." Hale looked at her a long moment in the lamplight. This thin, composed girl with her dead father's papers in one hand and her dead father's razor case in the other, and said, "At last, you mean to do this in the open, at the ball itself, before the whole county and Mr. Vane both?" "In the light," Lynette said, "where it can be judged clean," and did not elaborate further, because she had already begun, in the private ledger behind her ribs, to reckon the cost of the plan against the 6 days that remained before Michaelmas, and found, when she totted the sum, that she was willing to pay it. She did not see the Duke again before the night of the ball, though she heard of him daily through Hale, who reported him thinner, quieter, and increasingly absent from his own correspondence, signing whatever Vane laid before him with the flat obedience of a man too tired to read the words. On the day itself, the hall filled early with carriages and candlelight, and the particular restless hum of a county certain something was about to be settled. Though only 3 people present knew what that something might turn out to be. Mr. Fenwick arrived with his daughter Corisande on his arm, a handsome, brittle young woman in ice-blue silk, who greeted the assembled company with the flawless courtesy of someone reciting a lesson she had not chosen to learn, and Lynette, watching from the gallery stair in her plain gray, with the flannel-wrapped razor case pressed against her ribs beneath her shawl, thought there was something in the set of the girl's mouth that did not match the satisfaction a bride ought to wear on the eve of her own betrothal. Mr. Prentice the solicitor stood near the fire with the settlement papers already laid upon a side table, waiting on the appointed hour, a spare, gray, unhurried man whose presence alone seemed to steady the room the way a level steadies a wall. Simeon Vane moved among the guests, smoothing his cuffs and smiling his mouth-only smile, and twice his eyes found Lynette in the gallery shadow and held there a beat too long, as though some animal instinct beneath the good tailoring had already begun to smell weather-changing. The Duke came down at 9 precisely. In black, his scarred face freshly and closely shaved by his own unsteady hand that afternoon, Hale had reported, for he would let no one near him since the night he was given notice to give, and the crowd's small collective intake of breath at the sight of him, half fear and half fascination, was a sound Lynette had come to hate in 6 short weeks more than she had ever hated anything in her father's ruin. She came down from the gallery then, before she could think better of it, and crossed the hall in full view of the assembled county, with her shawl still hiding the case against her side, and Vane saw her first, and his smile did not so much as falter, which told her, more than anything yet had, exactly how dangerous a man he truly was. "Miss Marsh," he said, pleasantly, for the benefit of the room, "I had understood you were no longer in this house's employ." "I came to return something of my father's," she said to the man who ought to have it, and walked past him to where the Duke stood rigid and unspeaking by the hearth, and said, quietly, so that only those nearest heard it at first, "I have something you must see, Your Grace." and something you must hear, and I would rather have waited for a gentler hour, but I do not believe this family will be given one." The hall went from a hum to a held breath in the space of a single sentence, the way a room does when it senses, before it fully understands, that the evening it prepared for is not the evening it is about to receive. The Duke's eyes found her face and stayed there, searching it the way he had once searched her hands for a tremor, and whatever he read in it stopped him from ordering her from the room, though Vane had already stepped forward with his mouth arranging itself into an explanation. "Cousin, this is neither the place nor," Vane began. "It is precisely the place," Lynette said, and drew the flannel-wrapped case from beneath her shawl, and Prentice, watching from the fireside with the stillness of a man who has spent a career learning to notice exactly this kind of stillness in a room, came forward unbidden, papers still in hand. "This was my father's," Lynette said, and set the case on the side table beside the waiting settlement, and eased the false bottom free before 36 witnesses who had come dressed for a wedding and found themselves instead at an inquest. "My father was the surgeon who stitched your Grace's face 10 years ago, and who examined the wreck of the carriage the same week, and who wrote down what he found, and lost his shop, his custom, and in time his life, for refusing to unwrite it." She lifted the 2 brittle sheets into the lamplight and read them aloud, slowly, her voice not once shaking, the axle sawn through 3 parts of its width, the smith's report furnished by the estate's own man of business, the money offered to let the matter rest and refused. A gasp went round the room in a single wave, and the Duke had gone the color of old paper, his hand finding the mantel as though the floor beneath it had shifted. "That is the fevered fancy of a bitter, disappointed man," Vane said, and his voice, for the first time in 6 weeks, had lost some of its silk, though his cuffs still moved beneath his own smoothing hand, once, twice, the gesture Lynette had learned to read the way she read a pulse. "Fevered men do not underline a name twice and refuse a bribe on the strength of their fancy," Prentice said mildly, taking the pages from Lynette's hand and turning them to the light with a solicitor's unhurried care. "And there is this also," Lynette said, and drew Vane's own unsent letter from her work-basket, laying it beside her father's testimony. "Keep the dose at its present strength until after my Michaelmas, a settled man signs papers more readily than an anxious one." "Mr. Peel," she said, turning toward the apothecary, who had gone the color of tallow near the punch table, whose hand wrote the figure on the last bottle you delivered to this house. "Not the physician's, sir. I have seen the physician's hand, and it is not this." "Whose?" Peel's mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came, his thumb working helplessly against the cork of a vial he had not realized he still carried in his pocket. And then, in the particular collapse of a small man who has run out of masters willing to protect him, he said, "Miss Vane's. God forgive me. It was Mr. Vane's figure every time. The physician never wrote past the first fortnight, and I was paid to keep silent on it, and I am tired, sir, madam, I am so tired of being paid to keep silent." And the room's held breath broke at last into a low, unified murmur of horror that turned, slowly and entirely, away from the Duke's ruined face and toward Simeon Vane's suddenly unsteady hands. He did not run, and he did not shout, which was, in its way, the last elegant thing about him. He stood very still while Prentice read the letter through a second time for the benefit of Mr. Fenwick, whose daughter had gone white and silent beside him, her gloved hand pressed hard to her mouth, and when it was done, Vane laughed once, a small, terrible sound with no pleasantness left in it at all. "My father was the elder son," he said, "to no one and to everyone. and lost the title on a coin toss over a marriage settlement 50 years gone, and I have spent my whole life managing the accounts of a house that should have been mine, watching two boys who never once thanked me for it inherit everything I was raised to believe I deserved. I had a son of my own once. He died of a fever I could not afford the physician's full fee to cure. In the same month, Edmund Vane came of age to inherit all of this, and I did not saw that Axel in anger, whatever this room now believes of me. I did it so that there might be, at the end of it, something left over for my boy. His hand went to his cuff one final time, smoothing it, and this time Lynette saw it for what it truly was, not vanity, not composure, but grief worn so long as armor that the man beneath had forgotten how to remove it even now, with everything finally stripped away around him. "My son has been in the ground 4 years," he said, quieter now, "and I find I no longer entirely remember what I meant to spend any of it on." The Duke had not moved from the mantel through the whole of it, his face unreadable, but when he spoke at last, his voice was steady in a way that silenced even the last of the murmuring. "You will not be tried," he said. "I will not have this house's grief made into a public spectacle twice in one lifetime, and I will not have Miss Fenwick's name dragged through an assize because her father was made a fool of by a man he trusted. You will sign over the stewardship tonight, before these witnesses, and you will take the small annuity my father left you in his will, and never revoked. And you will leave this county by week's end and not return to it, and that is the whole of the mercy this family has left to offer you, cousin, and it is considerably more than you offered mine." Vane's composure broke at last, not into fury, but into something smaller and sadder, a bow that was almost sincere, and he said, very low, "I am sorry for the brother. I was never sorry enough to say it until tonight," and let Prentice lead him from the hall without another word. While Corisande Fenwick turned to the Duke with tears standing openly in her eyes and said, before her own father could speak for her, "I never wished this match, Your Grace. I wished only to be spared the shame of refusing it, and I am glad, more glad than I can say, in this dress, to be released from it honestly." And the two of them stood a moment in the wreckage of the evening's intended purpose and, unexpectedly, smiled at one another like two prisoners handed the same unlooked-for pardon. It was Mrs. Hale, weeping openly and unashamedly into her apron by the punch table, who first said aloud what half the room had already begun to whisper, that the Duke of Thornfield had not killed his brother at all, had carried a stranger's crime on his own scarred face for 10 years, and the news moved through Thornfield in the days that followed the way spring moves through a hard winter. Slowly at first and then, all at once, everywhere, the Duke sought Lynette out not in the shaving room this time, but in the walled garden behind the kitchens, where she had gone to be alone with the strange, light-headed grief of having finally set her father's ledger straight, and found her standing beneath the old apple tree with the lark's empty nest still lodged in its fork, wintering over. "I have spent 10 years believing I killed him," he said, without preamble, for that was, she had learned, the only way he knew how to begin the sentences that cost him the most. "I built this whole house, this whole face, this whole silence, around a guilt that was never mine to carry, and I do not yet know who I am without it. You are the man whose hand did not shake this morning shaving himself," she said, though I heard from Hale that it took him 3 tries to manage the jaw. He almost laughed, and did not quite. "I am asking you to stay," he said, "and I find I must ask it very carefully, because I have spent this whole summer discovering how much of what has been offered to me in my life was offered for the estate, or the title, or out of pity for the face, and I find I want, for once, to ask for something that costs the asker nothing and buys the asked for nothing either. Stay because you wish it, Linnet Marsh. I will not have you for gratitude, and I will not have you for rescue. And if you say no, I will still owe you a debt no razor could ever settle. She was quiet a moment, turning the old worn habit of her father's teaching over once more before she let it answer for her. A steady hand tells no lies, Your Grace, she said at last. Mine has not shaken once since the morning I first set it to your throat. Ask it what it wants and see whether it hesitates. She held it out to him, bare, ungloved, entirely steady, and he took it in both of his, and did not let it go again for a long while the lark's abandoned nest swayed a little in the branch above them, and the last of the autumn light lay gold and unhurried across the garden wall. They were married the following month in a chapel too small for half the county that wished to attend, with Mrs. Hale weeping through the whole of the short ceremony and dabbing her eyes on the very apron she had been wiping clean hands upon for 30 years out of habit, and Mr. Prentice standing as witness with the particular satisfaction of a man who had spent his career waiting for the rare case in which the paperwork and the justice finally agreed with one another. Corisande Fenwick sent a length of ice-blue silk as a gift, with a note that said only, I find I am to be married in the spring. To a sea captain my father would never have chosen for me, and I would never have chosen without this house's example, and I hope you will forgive me the once nearly stealing your husband from you for a settlement neither of us wanted. Mr. Peel lost his license within the year, quietly, without prosecution, and took up trade in a distant county where no one asked what had become of his old practice. Simeon Vane was never heard from at Thornfield again, though a letter reached Hale, unsigned, 2 winters later, saying only that a small garden had been let to him near the sea, and that he had planted roses, and that he thought of the boy sometimes without the old bitterness attached, which Hale read aloud once, folded away, and never mentioned again. The razor, cleaned and its false bottom mended by a Thornfield carpenter with more sentiment than skill, came to hang in the estate's still-room, and in time was given into the hands of a village boy Lynette took on to teach the trade her father had taught her, so that the blade that had once proved a family's innocence went on, in smaller and gentler ways, proving nothing at all except that a steady hand could still be trusted with an ordinary morning. Almost a year to the day after that first shaving, on a hot, bright morning much like the one that began it all, Linnet stood again at the washstand in the room that had once frightened 3 barbers out of the county, lathering a chin that was, this time, wholly and entirely known to her, while the lark or its grandchild sang on undisturbed in the eaves outside the window. Your hand is very steady, he said, watching her in the glass, exactly as he had said it that first morning, and she smiled and drew the blade up along the good side of his jaw first, the way she always had, the way she always would. She did not flinch. She never had, not once, not when it counted, and neither, in the end, had he. If this story warmed you, the way a steady hand can warm a frightened room simply by not shaking, then stay a little longer by this fire with me. I keep a chair here for exactly this, a kettle on, a candle lit, and no hurry to send anyone back out into the cold. Tell me, in the comments, which line stayed with you longest. Was it the razor's false bottom, giving up its secret? Or the moment she held out her steady hand and told him to ask it what it wanted? I love hearing which hinge of the story you would have lingered on, had you been standing in that garden yourself. And if you would like to keep a place kept warm for you here, by this hearth, for the next story and the one after, consider staying close, subscribing if you haven't, so I know to leave the lamp lit for you. Until then, be gentle with the overlooked ones in your own house, the quiet ones, the plain ones, the ones no one else has thought to look at closely, for you never do know, until the light finally reaches them, whose hand has been steady all along. Sleep well.